Welcome to the program, originally titled Bring Out Your Dead. And then I was informed that was a bad idea. And then I called it Donate Your Body to Science and Other Non-Traditional Plans for Your Body When You're Done with It. But that title took a while to get to the meat of tonight's talk. So it was aptly renamed Non-Traditional Burial Methods by our PR and marketing coordinator. So before we jump into it, I do want to share that I found all of this research very interesting. And although my coworkers, family, and friends are probably tired of my fun facts at this point, I do want to share that my excitement for these topics and information should not underscore the fact that these are difficult decisions that we must make for ourselves or maybe even loved ones. And we all handle grief differently. And no matter your decisions, I hope that you're keeping your loved ones in the loop and vice versa, that they're having conversations with you too. Because at the end, if you have something you feel very passionate about, you need to let other people know that. And your family should let you know that as well. So my favorite quote I came across through this whole process was by Timothy Leary, who began planning his disposition or what was going to happen to his body after he died after a terminal cancer diagnosis. Although he initially wanted his head preserved cryogenically, he ultimately asked a friend with some interstellar connections, hey, come on in, guys, to help get him to space. So 10 months after his death, 7 grams of his ashes were flown into space on a Pegasus rocket, which was released over the Canary Islands and orbited the Earth until they burned up in the atmosphere in 2002. It was the first space burial. And he is credited with the line, "You've got to approach dying the way you live your life, with curiosity, hope, experimentation, and with the help of your friends." And I believe this helps illustrate the importance of having those conversations and including those dear to you. Um, so your wishes can, oh, there were more. More? Why do I have so many words up here? Boop. So your wishes can be met. Okay, there we go. So traditional burials have looked very different in different parts of the world, from Tibetan sky burials to funeral pyres or burials at sea. Today, we're going to explore what naturally happens when we take our last breaths, what the most popular post-mortem choices are in the United States, other options that are available, and then some upsetting things that have happened to some folks' loved ones. We'll spend most of the time on the middle 2 points, but the first helps provide context as to why we have to do something, and the last cautions us to some unsavory actions that happen and some legislation that's in the work to help crack down on some capitalistic enterprise around cadavers. I also have a reference page that's physically on the table here, and I've also emailed it out shortly before the program began, so that way the links are clickable for you. Okay. So why are we here talking about death? Well, as the great wizard Gandalf said, death is just another path, one that we all must take. Although it may catch us by surprise or cause us to grieve and despair because of specific circumstances, it is a natural progression in our lives. So our bodies. As long as people have been alive, we've also been dying. Most bodies behave in the same way after death. Your body goes slack with your muscles relaxing, your jaw drops, pupils dilate, eyes open slightly, limbs droop to the ground if you're, on a flat surface, and the contents of your bladder and bowels are released without muscles and bodily systems holding them back. With your heart no longer pumping, your blood succumbs to gravity and your body will begin to pale as it settles to the lowest points. This is known as livor mortis, or the blueness of death. As your body cools to match the ambient temperature, we have algor mortis, or the coldness of death. Bodies don't get any colder than their ambient temperature. It's just your warm skin touching something that is no longer alive. So it's cooled, and that is that shock of the temperature different that we feel. After several hours, rigor mortis, or the stiffness of death, sets in. This is a temporary phase due to chemical changes in our muscles. As time progresses, rigor mortis peaks, the stiffness peaks, and then it slows and relaxes back down again. And then if no intervention is made, your body's natural bacteria take over, and putrefaction begins after a few days. So that's where your body will turn green, purple, black, with your body bloating and bulging from gases created internally by these bacteria, which is why some intervention needs to happen. We can't just leave bodies around. So The most popular choice for disposition in the United States is cremation. In the year 2015, cremation surpassed burials for the first time in the United States as the most popular choice. An estimated 59.3 deaths resulted in cremation in 2022. The top three cremation states are Nevada, Maine, and Oregon, with all of them cremating or having dispositions ending in cremating at a rate of 80% or higher. Although we are not a top state for cremations, Pennsylvania has the most crematories of all the states. I don't know why. Just fun fact. And all of this came from the National Funeral Directors Association 2022 Cremation and Burial Report. So what exactly is cremation? Remains are burned at high temperatures to make ashes. Families are encouraged to remove jewelry, other important personal items for them. Pacemakers must be removed prior to cremation because they will explode at high temperatures. Bodies are typically loaded into incinerators in cardboard or wooden boxes and burned between 1600 and 1800 degrees Fahrenheit for 1 to 4 hours. This may change depending on the size of the body or the fat content. Even after cremation, there are still large bone fragments that remain. Your pelvis bone is one of your larger bones that has the thickest part. So typically parts of the pelvis remain. So cremated remains are then pulverized to make them more uniform in appearance. And then the average adult usually results in about 6 to 8 pounds of cremains after that process is finished. Cremation can look different for each person. In 2022, 41% of the cremations were direct. So someone passed, they were cremated, they picked up the remains, something happened with them. 35% had a memorial service, they were cremated, there was a memorial service, and then 24% chose to have a casketed service and then were cremated afterwards. So they had a viewing prior to cremation. And then what do people do with cremains? Well, 41% of people reported that they were buried or interred somewhere. 26% said that they were returned to families, 18% were scattered somewhere, and 14% were split amongst relatives or family and friends. Now, scattering. If you're going to scatter on land, there is no single Pennsylvania state law against scattering. So that's where you have to check local ordinances, cities, parks, because there could be some rules there. And typically crematories or funeral homes in whatever area, they know what the local rules are. Federally, it's permissible, but you still need to get permission first. So if you go to the Grand Canyon, you need to reach out to the National Park Service in the Grand Canyon first to do it, because they also keep record of whose remains are there in case, you know, someone's DNA shows up where it's not supposed to, because again, so there might be some larger bone fragments or pieces in there that show up somewhere later and they're like, why is the remains of this person that died 20 years ago here? It's because their cremains were scattered there. So traditional burials now, when we say traditional, we're talking about a casket that goes into a vault that goes into a ground 6 feet deep. Now vaults ensure that the weight of the earth does not crush the casket, which is why cemeteries like to use them. Think about lawn care. It makes their life easier. If they don't have to worry about the earth sinking and then making a divot down below, it's easier to mow. 110%, guys. So this makes life easier for them. In 2022, an estimated 35.7% of dispositions were by burial. The top burial states were Mississippi, Alabama, Kentucky. Again, this is from that funeral director's report. And if you look at the map, it's like really like a southern click is the highest in burial still. Traditional burials can be quite expensive for families, which may contribute to their continued decline in popularity. Traditional funeral homes is where we see embalming as well. So that's where the body is clean and disinfected and plugged with cotton. Blood and bodily fluids are drained and replaced with embalming fluids, which are sometimes tinted to help make the body have a more fleshy appearance after they've passed, make you look more alive. If you're expecting guests, that's where morticians may use makeup or putty and put you in your last outfit. Embalming is meant to slow decay. It does not stop decay. It's just supposed to slow it down. That way the body can get through a funeral and a viewing before it's interred. The rate of decay depends on a multitude of factors. Still along the vein of burials, let's look at green burials next. So someone before was asking about a place north of the city. That's what we're going to talk about. So green burials, as defined by the Green Burial Council, is a way of caring for the dead with minimal environmental impact that aids in the conservation of natural resources, reduction of carbon emissions, protection of worker health, and the restoration and/or preservation of habitat. So we see this has become a growing and more popular trend, trying to be greener in our lives with the choices we make. And so shouldn't that extend to whenever we pass away as well? Traditional burials with the casket and the vault, that's meant to keep things there longer. That's a lot of materials in the ground that will take a long time to break down or may never break down, think plastics and stuff. So in Pennsylvania, there is only one natural cemetery. That's the orange tiny little star up there in Allegheny County. And then there are 5 hybrid cemeteries across the state. These are ones that are certified by the Green Burial Council. There may be others out there that say they're natural or say that they're hybrid, but they're just not certified by there. So hybrid cemeteries do not permit traditional toxic embalming fluids, and they prohibit vaults. So all burial containers, shrouds, items, clothing the person's wearing, everything that goes in the ground must be biodegradable. In our area, the Westview Cemetery with the Rodef Shalom congregation has a section set aside for green burials that also align with traditional Jewish burial practices. Natural cemeteries do all of those things that the hybrid ones do, but they also take it a step further to protect the natural ecological conditions and habitats. So they restrict operations within sensitive areas. They use practices that have no long-term degradation to the environment, and they limit the types of memorial markers that can be used and conform to standards that allow of allowable burial density. So if you think of our traditional cemetery, they're going to pack as many people in there as they want. They have standards for how many people are allowed on what size land for this to make sure things don't get too populated or overcrowded. So in our neck of the woods, there is our natural cemetery is in Penn Hills, and it's called the Penn Forest Natural Burial Park. Penn Forest is on 35 acres of land. 1/3 of that is set aside for natural preservation. As we said, they do not permit embalming fluids, and only biodegradable materials can be interred. They only allow flat native wood or stone markers, so no upright standing gravestone markers. They do allow markers, but they have to be flat. That way it's not impeding any of the natural growth that might happen, and people can get around it. And then and it's a DIY when it comes to digging. So they try to keep things natural so they don't allow heavy equipment on there. So if that's something you plan for, make sure you've got some diggers in your family, or, plan for that as well. On the bright side, it's not 6 feet deep. Pennsylvania state law only requires that bodies be buried 2 feet below the natural surface of the ground. Penn Hills requires an extra foot. So Penn Forest Natural Burial Park, bodies are buried 3 feet deep. We talked about caskets and vaults, how they have the vault to make sure things don't sink down. It's assumed that as time goes on, whether the body is just in a shroud or in like a pine box, that will degrade, and so they just heap the extra dirt up on it. So it's more of a mound on top of it. So they only do 3 feet deep, 2 feet, cool. So since there's not a vault, yes, it said all those things. Perfect. Next, DIY. You want to get real DIY and you want to get more local than Penn Hills, why not your backyard? Resale value might affect, and if you have a HOA, might want to check the rules there. But Pennsylvania laws require that bodies be buried 2 feet deep, and they from the natural surface, and it cannot be near a stream or river that is a water supply. So that's it for Pennsylvania state laws. Additionally, it is illegal to drive your body in to drive a body around in the back seat of your car. So if you are trying to plan something yourself, you need to think about transportation, or reaching out to a funeral home for help transporting, or contacting the local authorities to say, hey, I want to transport this person from our home to Penn Hills, what do I need to do? What permission do I need to make that happen? So another consideration is bodies must be at their final resting place or on ice essentially within 24 hours. So you can't just have a body sitting on the couch or in the bed where they passed away at home indefinitely, because after time, those natural processes that we talked about start happening and becomes relatively, it could be unsafe for people around them, especially depending on what they died from. So if you are looking to do something at home, dry ice is an option. It would help keep a body cool, and you could keep a body at home for several days with that. In Pennsylvania, I'm trying to recall, I don't think a medical examiner has to sign off on a death certificate. And so if someone did pass away at home, you could always petition the county for a death certificate or reach out to funeral home, hospital, doctor kind of thing. So there are ways to work around it if you are trying to keep things natural and at home for someone or for yourself. But if you also want to do something a little more hybrid for you, or you don't want to keep someone, a body that's passed at your home, but you don't want to go a traditional funeral route, you could always reach out to a funeral home, because there's one in Bethel Park. I think it's the Hennessy one that works with the Penn Hills. And so they do like allow you to, they'll like store a body there and help get the body to Penn Hills kind of thing. So there's some different options out there once you get into it. We talked about cremations. We talked about burials. Now, if you prefer a moister final resting place, there's always at sea. In 2020, there were a reported 2,544 reported burials at sea, which include both bodies and cremains. The EPA is in charge of these rules, and their requirements are that it has to be 3 nautical miles away from shore. It can only be human remains. Your furry friends can't come with you, and that everything that goes into the water is biodegradable or readily compostable, so no plastic. And the goal is for the body to stay down at the bottom of the ocean, so it has to be properly weighted. And the EPA just asks that you let them know within 30 days that you've done this. So because we are a landlocked state, and the Great Lakes don't count as this, we'd have to go out to sea. You would have to think about transporting a body, unless you planned it and were already in Florida kind of thing. Florida is the top state for at-sea burials because they record it by the state that they left from. So staying at sea, I mentioned that they want to record it both scattering cremains and with stuff at sea, because again, pieces might end up where they shouldn't be, and they want to have a record of where people's final resting places are supposed to be. So the EPA's page gives guidance to help make sure those things that sink down to the ocean stay there. Non-casketed remains should be in natural fiber and with additional weight wrapped around them, such as a steel chain. And then casketed remains need holes drilled into them with additional weight, and they need to be banded. So there's actually a diagram, and this is from the Navy's 2010 guidelines for casket preparation, because they do steel cases, which is the EPA is like, if you're not sure what kind of box to use, you could always get a steel case like the Navy. So they drill 8 holes into the bottom, 8 holes into the top, and then 2 into the head and foot of the casket. And then they band it as well. And then additional soil or sand or like concrete has to be in there, because again, the goal is to get it to sink and get it to stay down there. Okay. Now let's look into some more unique options. There is only one location in the United States that allows for open air cremation. Think funeral pyre. That is in Colorado. So the Creestone End of Life Project is a nonprofit organization that serves the residents in Creestone, Colorado, and the surrounding county. Their services include a pyre, a half cord of wood, a wooden stretcher, and a shroud. The deceased must be pre-registered and a resident of the county at least 3 months prior to death. So it's not something, if you passed away here and you've never been there before in your life, you couldn't say, hey, I want to be open air cremated out there. You have to be a resident of the county 3 months prior. They do also have natural burial lands at their facility too. because sometimes depending on the way the person died, open air cremation might not be an appropriate choice for them. Another option that's gained popularity is human composting. So Washington State was the first state to legalize this method of disposition, with several others following suit. Arizona, Colorado, Delaware, Maine, Maryland, Minnesota, Nevada, New York, Oregon, and Vermont have all passed bills into law, and that allows human composition there. California has also passed a bill, but it does not go in effect until 2027. Pennsylvania has a bill that was introduced in the House in the 2021-2022 legislative session, but it was sent to committee in 2022, and that was the last action on it. So human composting speeds up the natural decomposition process. So just like composting organic material, I have a composter at home, a black bin, put stuff in, spin it around. That black bin helps it get more sunlight, trapping it in there so that way not as much oxygen is going in and out, forcing that stuff to react more quickly. That's what they do with a body. So they put a body in a vessel with added materials in there to aid in the decomposition. They increase the temperature, and the result after 8 to 12 weeks is about a cubic yard, or somewhere between 500 and 1,000 pounds, because they have extra added stuff in there. It's not just a body. They put dirt in there, they put alfalfa chips, they put other organic material in there to help break down that body faster. And just like cremation, there's bits left over that aren't tiny little chunks. So the same thing with this human composition, composting, there's chunks left over too, so they also pulverize it into a finer, like mulch-like thing. And then from there, the locations, like especially the one out in Washington, they have natural forest around them, that they can put that there, or if the family would like the soil back at the end, the family could take the soil. So that is something that's not permissible in the state of Pennsylvania right now, but if that's something you were interested in, you could look at other states. Again, transporting a body and making those accommodations is something we'd have to take into consideration. Now, these next two are a little more controversial, and I couldn't find as much solid information beyond what their creators say. So tree pods or cremations are capsules meant to hold the cremains, or a whole body that would be buried with a plant or a tree planted above them. Currently, the whole human body option is still a concept. It is not marketed. It does not exist quite yet, but they do sell like a biodegradable urn that's made with a bioplastic. So human ashes have a very high pH. So if you were to just dump a bunch of ash on a plant, you're probably going to kill the plant. And so the bioplastic that it's in is meant to slowly break down over time. So that way, not all of that super high pH acidic stuff is leached out at once. And then there's also like, you don't want a tiny sapling placed on it, because you want something a little bit more robust that's had a little bit longer to thrive and succeed. And even then, whenever you look at their options in like a forest, they say, you know, about 50% of the saplings die. So it's just being aware, like if that's something you really want, if your sapling or your tree dies, plant another tree. Mushroom suit became a really hot topic after the Beverly Hills 90210 star Luke Perry was laid to rest in one, and the creator did a TED talk on it. Their website is no longer active. There's not an option to buy any mushroom suit online. I couldn't find one for sale, so I'm not exactly sure what happened to the shrooms there, but it was really hot for a while. So if you hear someone talk about the mushroom suit, if they got more information, send them my way, but couldn't find anything else. Now on to my favorite part. Oh, before we go on to that, someone was saying like, oh, remains getting turned into jewelry. So I just did like a quick search on that, and I found a really pretty ring that I liked and pinned it to. And there's a lot of companies out there that you can send off cremains to, and they will turn it into something and send it back. So for a ring, all they want is 1/8 of a teaspoon. So they only want a tiny amount of the cremain. So you still have to think you're going to have something left over from that. But if you are looking to, you know, share bits of a loved one with other loved ones, those are other options too. So my favorite, whole body donations. So when someone says they want to donate their body to science, this is typically what they mean. You can search and find all sorts of organizations. Many of them are for profit, and which we'll talk about in a minute. So a local PA1 is the Human Gifts Registry, formerly known as the Anatomical Board. They have been around since 1883. They work with 10 medical and dental schools in Pennsylvania, including Pitt and Penn State. The Humanity Gifts Registry is a nonprofit, and schools only pay for expenses to help transport the bodies and get them and send them back, and that's it. No, the body stays together. No parts are ever sold off to any other groups or organizations or entities. Bodies are typically embalmed and to help slow the decay, to help with them to do surgical training over time. So they say it could take up to 2 years for the school to be done using the body, but when they are done with them, remains are cremated. And at that point, if the family has made prior arrangements, the cremains would be returned to next of kin, or they maintain several cemeteries across the state. They would inter the remains at a cemetery. It would be identifiable by a number that they've assigned, but family could still go visit that final resting spot if they wanted to. Alternative, oh yeah. So my great grandmother, she was down in Alabama. She lived to be 97. She donated her body to science to the state of Alabama, and I looked up their process. It's very similar to what it is here, to where at the end they keep it, they don't sell it off, they make a promise like, we're going to keep it, we're going to treat your loved one with dignity. And she said that someone needed to figure out how she lived as long as she did, because she started smoking when she was 12, and lungs were always fine. She was the only person at her nursing home allowed to smoke, because everyone else that had been like grandfathered in after they changed the rule had already passed away. So she was the last one there in Mobile, Alabama. Another one, if you feel like traveling a bit and you want to help a different kind of research, in decomposition research specifically, there is the Body Farm in Knoxville, Tennessee. Both of my sisters went to school at UTK, and I had lots of friends there. And whenever I was researching this, I'm like, I always knew it was near it, but I assumed it was like further off in the woods. Nope. Nope, I've been hiking less than a mile from it by the bluffs. It's right across the river from the stadium. I was like, oh, dang, like this is there. But it's run by UT's Forensic Anthropology Center, and it's currently on 2 acres that's dedicated to the systematic study of human decomposition. So it's founded by Dr. Bill Bass, and the Body Farm subjects corpses to different traumas in environments to measure the effects of decomposition on them. When Dr. Bill Bass, one of his books is back there, Death's Acre, whenever he was emerging in the field and he was a professor down at UT, they would bring bodies to him like, hey, help us, figure out whose body this could be or what might have happened to them. And there was no standard for what might happen to a body when it's left in the trunk of a car or when it's submerged in water and stuff like that. So the work at the Body Farm has helped law enforcement to establish these and help them solve crimes. So it's also a training tool. So the FBI and local agencies go visit there and do trainings on site and learn lots of valuable information. Pre-registration is recommended because there's extensive paperwork that includes consent. So how we were talking about different traumas, you could consent if you are okay with your body being subjected to thermal trauma, blunt force trauma, different kinds of things, or you could choose not to. Remains do not get returned to the family. The first body that was donated in 1980, the skeletal remains of it are still viewed today. So they have a collection of 1,800 skeletal remains at UT, dating as far back as 1892, that they still use for forensic anthropology and to study. So it's possible for family to go visit those remains, but they are not returned to the family. UT also accepts donations of cremains. Now, that was the happy side of donating your body to science. Some of you may recall the story of Alistair Cooke when it broke in the early 2000s. Unfortunately, body snatchers are not just a tale of Victorian medical students hoping to study anatomy. Broadcaster and journalist Alistair Cooke's last wish was to have his remains scattered in Central Park, which his daughter accomplished, despite it being illegal for New York state laws. So imagine the shock and horror she had when she received a phone call almost 2 years later, letting her know that thieves had actually picked apart her father's body as part of an illegal sale of body parts, and that they recovered his remains, some of his remains. So, a New Jersey dentist led this criminal ring that illegally harvested body parts from more than 1,000 people. They bribed funeral directors, they forged consent forms and medical records, and even replaced stolen bones with plastic pipes to hide their misdeeds. Harvested body parts and tissues were sold to tissue processing companies for use in transplants and research. Mr. Cook, who died of lung cancer that had spread to his bones, had an arm and leg bones removed, and erroneous paperwork was filed with the company saying that he died of a heart attack. So you could see the medical implications that that could hurt someone. Um, it's unclear if Mr. Cook's remains ever made their way to a transplant patient, but other diseased and unhealthy tissues did. A man in Ohio contracted HIV and hepatitis C, while a woman developed syphilis, all stemming from this illegal harvesting ring. Along with losing his dental license, the mastermind was sentenced to 54 years in prison and passed away of cancer in 2013. As a result of the high profile and scandalous case, the FDA created a task force and updated guidance and regulations to cut down on modern body snatching. However, it is illegal for organizations to incentivize donations. They can't say, hey, we'll give you $5,000 if you leave your body to us. It's illegal for them to do that. But it is not illegal for them to resell parts afterwards. So when a body is donated, some organizations match different parts or tissues with different companies, schools, entities. So, hey, this group says they want bone from this demographic of a person, so we can go send them an arm bone. This group is looking for spleens to study, we'll send them a spleen. So it depends on the group that your body is donated to. These companies typically are fee-based, and that helps them recoup their cost and continue operations. Groups like the Human Gifts Registry and the Body Farm are transparent with their practices. So if that's something you are looking into donating your body to science, look at the fine print and ask questions, because if it's important to you that your remains end up back with your family or something, then that's something you want to consider. The National Funeral Directors Association have helped to champion legislation that's currently sitting in committee. The Consensual Donation and Research Integrity Act would require entities who are reselling body parts, bodies, parts, or tissues to register with the Department of Health and Human Services. Next of kin would be kept in the loop, and chain of custody would be established. Minimum standards for labeling, packing, and shipment of remains would be created, as well as requirements for final disposition and return to next of kin. These rules would not apply to groups like the Organ Transplantation Network or groups like the Human Gifts Registry that do not resell donations. Woohoo! Ending on a happy note. So on the handout, these are some books for further reading. If you're interested in any of them, if you're interested in Green Burials, the Green Burial book by Elizabeth Forner is back on that table, and it was an excellent read. That's where a lot of the information about, dry ice and thinking about transportation and your different options. Death Acres is about the body farm in Tennessee and goes a lot more into like the anthropological side and the development of it in the science. So a couple of different things. Rest in Pieces is not one that we have, but it is a book all about like weird things that have happened to people's bodies over time. Everything like Voltaire, who was alive French Revolution, pre-French Revolution, when he passed away because he knew the church did not like him. And if the church did not like you in France, they tossed you out in the refuse heap, because he saw that happen to a friend who was an actress, and that was considered a not great profession with the church. And so he made plans with a nephew of him who like helped prop up his body and make it look like it was still alive and get him out of the city so the church wouldn't toss him in the refuse heap. And then many years later, after the French Revolution, his remains were actually brought back to Paris with much pomp and circumstance and reinterred there. And Stiff is cool because it's the interesting life of human cadavers. So again, if you are interested in more about the different things that could happen to cadavers after they've been donated and just general bodies in general, that's a fun read. Not a fun read, but it's a read. And then information sources. So where all this information came from, and then clickable links. Again, if you want to really into burial at sea, the EPA's website has tons of information about those different guidelines. And then the report about the funeral directors is on there too. So, any questions? I may not be able to answer them, but we can sure try.